I was tickled when my grandson told me he'd heard I was being talked about as the torch. We don't do much burning in my neck of the woods. So first of all, I need to start with a bit of a disclaimer. I have only been in the driver's seat for about 15 years, and all of my experiences in South Georgia, and most of that is with planted pines, not the hardwoods that you have in North Georgia.
Do you want to hold this?
Yes, because
yeah,
I'm short. Okay.
There you go.
Is it working? Okay, so here's my burn crew. I do the feet on the grounds work, and Jose does the wheels on the ground. Occasionally we have students to help us. I come to my experience with a couple of very memorable, healthy respect, aka fear, of fire. When I was a little girl in Australia, I vividly remember running home from school with the eucalypt forest on fire on both sides of the road. And then my next experience was helping my husband with a site prep burn, and there was one of those fire tornadoes went up and over, and it landed right next to my car across the road. So, healthy respect. So in the beginning, as I said, hardly anybody was burning in my neck of the woods, but I knew it should be done. And but I thought, that's my job. I'm alone in this. I'm doing it by myself, trial and error, figure out what works and what doesn't. And so I tried to micromanage it because I was nervous, right? And I soon found that it's a little bit, once you drop that match, it's a little bit like birthing a baby. You do your best to plan for it, you try to guide it along the way, but it's going to do what it pleases, and it's got a life of its own. And so when I started, we were doing it all by ourselves, and I didn't realize just how much resources were out there. I very soon learned, because I had 3 escapes, how important my best buddies, the county GFC folks, were. They came and rescued me 3 times, but I guarantee I'm not going to guarantee their job security. Now, it took me several years to find out about the technical assistance and cost share programs, but I want to give a real shout out to what I've seen is over the last decade, a huge increase in the quality and quantity of educational outreach. The prescribed fire, PBAs, the learn and burns, the short courses with Longleaf Alliance and equivalent, they've been absolutely fantastic. But as I look back, I think there are a couple of things missing. One is that there's a lot of emphasis on the how to burn, but I think there are a lot of landowners out there who really don't understand why to burn. And I'm going to come back to that later. So the things that I still want to learn is how to do better fire breaks for different parts of my property, and also how can I predict fire behavior based on the species of plants in my understory. So that's a hint for future sessions. I'm going to start following up from Ken. Thank you, Ken. Burning after Hurricane Helene. We had stands that went all the way from almost no damage to severe. And when you have that hurricane, obviously there's more fuel on the ground, which means there's a bigger risk of wildfire. And those of us who are here know that the best way to deal with that is to reduce it by using prescribed burns. So the very first thing you have to do is you need to go in there and clear up your trails so that you can get access, so that the salvage loggers can move in, so that if there is a wildfire, you could get fire trucks moving onto the property. And if you're going to have a hurricane, the very best time of year is at the beginning of the hunting season. No, 2 days after the hurricane had passed through, I had a dozen hunters converge on the property with chainsaws and generators and all their equipment, wanting to get to their tree stands. Neat. Okay, so then you have to clear your fire breaks so that you can start doing prescribed burns. So I've got a couple of examples here that follow nicely from what Ken's been saying. Here's a stand on the left, and this is that same stand I showed earlier. It's right on a 4-lane highway, and I think that a tornado probably touched down there because the trees were all twisted and fallen every which way. Now, this looks like one of those high-intensity photos that Ken had, and indeed it is, but it's not as bad as it looks. It really was very flashy because those leaves were hanging. This is the canopies of the trees that were down, and the leaves were hanging on those branches like wet washing on the clothesline, and they burned very quickly and consumed and went out, leaving behind those larger branches, and we'll deal with that on our next fire if they're not already rotted down. So it was really a beautiful burn, but that's what scares landowners from not doing it. This is another situation, just a few yards down the road, and that is not car tires, rubber tires on fire. That is the biggest and the best trees were the ones that were most likely to blow down. And those big pine trees have a lot of resin in their heartwood. This is a bunch of fat lighter going up. And that dense black smoke is coming from that resin. Now, this is right on the highway. So I was sure glad that the meteorologists predicted, and it held steady, and the wind blew off the highway, because that would have been a really bad situation if the wind had turned and it was blowing onto affecting traffic visibility. And also, of course, there are the health consideration for anybody working on that fire, right? So not only is there more fuel, but it's also distributed differently. As those trees fell down, they would often hit another tree next door to it and slide down the side of it. So you finish up with a lot of these downed trees right next to your very few precious survivors. And if I were to light this up without doing any, without moving the debris away from the base, I'd finish up killing a lot of my remnant trees. So I've got cleanup to do before I can burn. Another thing that I contended with is that when you do a regular logging operation, surprise, surprise, you cut the trees off above the ground level and leave the stumps in the field. But when you've got the trees down and you're doing a salvage logging operation, you're hauling the entire tree to the loading ramp. And I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a joy to behold. But that loader operator gets those stumps and he throws them like a baseball, pitching a baseball. And it lands up there in this huge pile that I normally wouldn't have at my loading ramp. Unfortunately, it's too close to those trees, and I'm going to have to get a bulldozer to push them away before I can burn the fire parts. Not only that, but those trees are being shaken around, and so there's often a reject piece of wood at the butt of the log that's all splintered and fractured and is unmarketable. So you have a huge amount of debris at that loading ramp that you normally wouldn't have. And so when you burn that, this is what you get. More fuel with more resin means you've got a lot more heat, which means a lot more convection currents. The embers are bigger and they're being carried high in the sky. They travel a long distance. They stay lit for a longer time. They land and they're going to create spot fires. And so this isn't one that you can drop the match and go home and have dinner and go to bed. You need to be sure to monitor those debris piles when you light them up. That tornado kind of site was right next to the drive into my home, and I couldn't even use the main drive for more than a week because it took me so long to clean it up. It was a huge amount of debris on the ground, so I decided to splurge, and I got a guy to come in with a mulching machine, and I said, "Don't waste your time on the big stuff. I just want you to get in and do a quick and nasty job, and I'll get in there and burn it and clean it up so it didn't look so ugly. And so I did that, and surprise, surprise, the mulched area didn't burn at all. The only place that burned was the in-between sites where you didn't go and you had loose pine needles on the ground. So I thought that was kind of interesting. There are a couple of other things that come in after the hurricane. One is that there are a lot more invasive plants are going to be introduced. The Japanese climbing fern spores were fertile at that time of the year, and those strong winds are going to be blowing those fertile spores throughout our forests. And they're not just going to pop up along the trails where the heavy equipment carries seeds and vegetative material. And so we're going to have to do a lot more monitoring and treatment of for invasive species. You can also get changes in fire behavior as these invasives come in. Not only do another interesting one was the witness trees fell. So these are some of the biggest ones, and they fell. And we're going to have to do a lot of cleanup for the next couple of years along our boundary lines to make sure that they're open, that I can get fire breaks in there and control both loggers and fire so they don't go off my property. But the bottom line is, it could have been a whole lot worse. And if I hadn't drawn this from the experience I've had so far, I'd rather have a hurricane than a wildfire. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about fire. So this is my home in the woods, and you can see it took me a long time to clean up around my house. And I vividly remember going to the burn certification course, and there was a PowerPoint, and I don't know who did it, but there was a photo of a house in the woods. And there's a question, what do you call a house in the woods? And the answer was firewood, kindling. And no, my house hasn't burned up, but I'm glad it hasn't. But that got me really thinking about all of the buildings I have that are surrounded by woods and how I need to protect them so that they're not vulnerable to wildfires. And so what I do here is that I burn this area around the buildings every year in the dormant season. I start right after Thanksgiving, which is after the main rut, and the hunters have had their Thanksgiving dinner and they've gone home to spend time with their families so that they can come back in January. But when I do this, I do very small acreages at a time. And I get all of my equipment and all of the personnel I can rake up, including free volunteer students if I can. So often these are around buildings where I've got a water supply and I can use water hoses, and that's ISIS there with a water hose. Jose's got a leaf blower. Jonathan Bamford, who's now in GFC, is all of our ATVs are equipped with spray equipment. And of course I have rakes and flappers and a tractor with a disc. So this is micromanaging, controlling fires. So how did I protect my home in the woods? After listening to all those Firewise recommendations. Well, I think about it as setting it up with concentric circles. My home is in the middle, and then I have around it about a 30-foot lawn that I mow and don't have things that are flammable. And then around that, for aesthetics, I have about a 10 to 20-foot strip with the native trees and shrubs and a few azaleas to make it look pretty now and then. And I don't burn that strip. But around that, I have a fire break, which I also use as a walking trail. And then I burn everything around that every year, dormant season. If a wildfire were to come along, I think I could probably burn that 10-foot strip, and I'd have a very well protected black area around my home with low fuel. And I just love burning this place. It's right next to one of the hunting cabins. And listen to that. No sound. I did say I didn't need sound. Those of you who've burned, can you imagine this? The 1812 overture. Pop, 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 pop. And so one time I phoned the hunters and I said, I'm burning next to your cabin. Just listen to this. And trying to scare them. Didn't work. Okay, so my next little section, I want to talk about those landowners who don't understand why they should burn. Sometimes it'll be tradition. My daddy didn't do it, my granddaddy didn't do it, so therefore I don't need to do it. There's also, it costs time and money, and I don't have enough of either. There is also, yes, they know this costs you out there, but I hardly ever, you can't very often get it, and it's not worth the hassle. And that's my experience too. It's difficult to schedule because of the weather. April is too windy, May is too dry, July is too hot, and there's an excuse for every month. Of course, there are the liability concerns that we talked about earlier, and some people live so close to sensitive areas that they can't get a permit anyway. I'm in the backwoods, so I can burn whenever I like. Great. But there's also not only those kind of concerns, but as they drive down the roads, they see scorched trees. Not just me. Mine are just scorched here. Others are scorched up here, you know. But they look at the scorch and they say, if the trees are losing needles, they're losing timber production. And maybe they're getting scarred up and I have to sell my saw timber as pulpwood. Or maybe some of the trees are even killed. So why should I burn my woods? Well, there are offsetting positive benefits from burning in the woods. And these are not well talked about and not well understood. So I want you to look at these two sites. Right now, they're opposite each other with a road. Mine, which one do you think is mine? Mine is the one on the right, of course. Mine is B. But when I started out, it was like A. And I want you to think, if you're a deer or a turkey, where would you like to hang out and get the juiciest, most nutritious food? B, right? And I tell my hunters, I do more for their hunting by thinning and burning than they ever do with their food plots. And more deer, bigger deer, and more healthy deer. And not only that, but I lease my property to hunters. So I get a group of hunters and say, which one are they more likely to pay a higher price for their lease? They want to be able to see those deer. They're going to be able to see the deer in B and not in A, right? So then, as a landowner, I want to thin my trees. I want to leave the best trees, and I want all those forked and deformed ones taken out, right? So I want to get somebody to come in and mark my trees. Which one is going to be more efficient to mark? B. Which one is going to cost me less to make somebody come and mark it? B. And then I come to a final harvest, and I want to clear cut that stand. I want to get a sealed bed. So the potential buyers are going to send in their cruisers, and they're going to give me a bid. Now, if they come into site B, they're going to be able to move into the site. They're going to be able to get estimates with low error rates, and they're going to give me a fair market price for their bid. If they come to site A, they're going to probably eyeball it from the highway, maybe do a couple of transects, But they're going to say there's a lot of uncertainty out there in terms of how much timber is on that stand. I'm going, just to play safe, I'm going to give a lowball estimate. So I'm going to get more for my timber if I've got it nicely thinned and burned like I have. Not only that, but the loggers, I've had experience with this, they don't want to come into sites like the one on the left. I had one team quit because they couldn't get it with all the vines. Long story I won't go into. Okay, the last one is the site preparation. So if I'm doing site preparation, after I've clear cut site A, there's going to be a lot of woody debris and down hardwoods that didn't go to market on the ground. I'm going to have to do some kind of mechanical site preparation, which means at least V-blade where they're going to plant the trees. In contrast, and I've had lots of experience with site A, I keep thinking I'm getting them backwards. On site B, if I've been thinning and burning, I've already done a lot of my site preparation. There is so little woody stuff left on the ground. All I have to do is the typical herbicide and burn, and those hand planters can just come right in and step over the few branches. So left, right, and centre, I am saving money. That is often not recognised. Now, as I'm managing my property, I'm really concerned about invasive plants, and burning is a critical tool in my toolbox for integrated pest management. This stand here was one of the first I dealt with when I started to learn about Japanese climbing fern. And it was sticking its head out from that layer of, dense layer of grapes that was suspended above blackberry. And I knew full well that I was wasting my time trying to kill that climbing fern with herbicide. So the last day of August, my very first summer burn, I went in there and I burned that and burned beautifully. And 6 weeks later, the blackberry and the grape had hardly started to resprout. But the Japanese climbing fern was in full glory and exposed, and I could come in and herbicide. I got very good coverage and very good kill. So fire for killing the bad boys, but I also use it for promoting the good girls. And I didn't mean to be sexist. Okay, so if I want good plants, like Phil was saying, fire is incredibly important. And I keep seeing more and more plant species coming in the more I burn. But not only that, but in my wetlands, if I have pitcher plants, then they need sunlight, and they're not going to thrive in the shade of gallberries and taitais and things like that. But if I'm valuing controlled burning in my forest management, I need to think about making sure I've got a good fuel on the ground so that I can burn. And I'm going to describe two situations where that has been important. This is one, and again, this is one from my early learning how to do this experience. This is mid-rotation loblolly with very dense shrubby understory and hardwood suppressed trees as well. And so I obviously was too scared to burn it like this. So I thought, aha, I know what to do. I got the loggers to come in and thin the property, and they smashed all that woody stuff onto the ground, and I didn't have to worry about it being right up there near the canopy. So I ran a fire through. It was wonderful. Did a fantastic job. But a couple of years later, I wanted to do my second burn, and it was a dud. Nothing would burn because there was no grass. The woody shrubs had started to resprout, and the pine trees were so far apart there weren't enough needles on the ground for the fire to carry. So I amended my instructions to my forestry consultant, and I said, if you have a situation like this, I want you to do a light thinning. I want you to leave enough pine trees that there's enough pine needles that the fire will carry. And then I can burn at frequent intervals, and the grasses will start to be established. And by the time I do my second thinning, I can thin as many trees as I please. So fire is establishing that burnable ground cover is important. Here's the second one, and this is in site preparation. And when I first started, the standard practice for site preparation was to come in and nuke the site so you had bare ground, and using arson. And I came in and then I planted longleaf, and I found that I wanted to burn 2 years after planting, and lo and behold, the ground was bare. And what do you think? That fire didn't carry. I couldn't burn it. So that kind of site prep is fine for loblolly, where I need to maximize my control of woody shrubs before I put the seedlings in the ground, but it doesn't work for longleaf. I want to be able to carry fire from a couple of years, and I'm going to use that fire to control the resprouting of any woody shrubs. So what I need to do to maintain a burnable ground cover is that I use the herbicide recommended by Nathan Klaus, which is the Garlon Escort. It doesn't kill your grasses, so 6 months after planting, it looks like the photo on the bottom. So I can burn whenever I please. And the longer I burn, the more diversity I get in the ground cover. So in my experience, the bottom line is the more you burn, the easier it gets and the more fun you have. And if I have multiple objectives, I need to be creative and in the way that I use fire in my planning. Thank you.